Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Neil Seidman, and I'm the co-chair of the Public Education Committee for ADAA. That's the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. So welcome to our webinar, Taking the Terror Out of Terrorism. And our presenter is Dr. Debra Kissen. And we're going to be recording the webinar, so you'll be able to see it again on the ADAA website. You should be listening to this through your computer speakers. You don't need a telephone connection. And if you've dialed in, hang up and turn up your computer speakers. So before we begin, I'd like to say just a little about ADAA, the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. ADAA was started back in 1979, and today it's the leading nonprofit organization in the field of anxiety and depression. Our mission is to improve diagnosis and promote the prevention, treatment, and cure of anxiety, depression, and stress-related disorders through education like this webinar, through practice and research. We work to end stigma and get the word out that these conditions are real, serious, and treatable. And I want to invite you to visit the ADAA website. It's really a wonderful resource. So that's adaa.org. Okay, so let's get started. Now, during the webinar, we want to really invite you to type in your questions. So if you look on the right side of your screen, you should see a Q&A panel. And at the bottom of that panel is a little field, and when you click in it, you can type in your question. Then you can either hit your Enter key or click the icon. And only Dr. Kissen and myself can see your question. So as we go along, just feel free to type in a question and we'll get to as many as we can. Great. So I'm really happy to introduce our presenter, Dr. Debra Kissen is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's the clinical director of Light on Anxiety Treatment Center in Chicago. She has a special interest in mindfulness-based treatment for anxiety disorders. And in her practice, she provides cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT for short, for children, adolescents, and adults, with a focus on anxiety and stress-related disorders, including OCD, PTSD, panic disorder, agoraphobia, social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, specific phobias, separation anxiety disorder, compulsive skin picking, and trichotillomania. And Dr. Kissen is also my co-chair on the ADAA Public Education Committee. So now let me turn it over to Dr. Kissen.
Thank you so much, Neil, for that helpful introduction. And it looks like we have quite a few participants, which is great. We were recently talking, the Public Education Committee at ADAA, given the state of the world and the different concerns and fears that we're hearing from our clients and the constituents that we serve, that we came up with the idea that it might be helpful to offer a discussion on this topic, and I'm glad that all of you were able to take some time out of your busy life to join us right now. So my goal, Neil's goal, we really want to make this interactive, and so I prepared some material that I'm going to walk through it during this talk, but I also want to make sure that I'm meeting your needs, and that if you have anything in particular that motivated you to be here right now and that you're looking to get out of it, don't be shy. As Neil said, your questions will only be seen by me and by Neil, and so feel free to post a question, post a thought, so that I could try to gear the material to help you get what you're most looking for. So you don't need to wait to the end. Feel free to kind of, as we're talking, to share a thought or a question, and we will get started. So, technology. Okay. So taking taking the terror out of terrorism as best one can try to do such a thing is what we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're referring to terrorism for purposes of this presentation, comparing our fear thoughts with reality, giving some clinical examples of terrorism anxiety that I'm seeing in my practice, and then talking about the different CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy tools that can be used to treat all kinds of anxiety. And so it just happens, whether it's a dog phobia, fear of flying, OCD, fear of germs, terrorism anxiety, it's the same toolbox of how do we handle a situation when our anxiety is getting out of control and impacting our ability to function. So for purposes of this presentation, this is in no way a political presentation, just really talking about, in a very general sense, the word terrorism. So the Federal Emergency Management Agency defines terrorism as illegal force or violence for purposes of intimidation or coercion. And unfortunately, in the world that we see in, there are many images that we all are constantly flooded with. And I'm sure in our mind's eye, we could all come up with endless examples of what terrorism means to us and what we think of when we hear the word terrorism. So, and unfortunately, I could add more and more pictures to keep those images going. And, you know, even for purposes of this talk, because we're talking about anxiety and how it impacts us, it could be school shootings. It could be, you know, the terrible shooting of policemen today, just acts of terror and violence that are sent out into the universe to create a message of fear. And so why is this showing up more in, sorry, my slides are looking a little, why are we, in our collective consciousness, are we seeing more, experiencing more terrorism anxiety? And like I said, the words that come to mind, this one slide has lots of different examples in my own mind when I think of terrorism: violence, bombs, fear, religion, danger. They're all different trigger words that bring about the same different feelings. So sometimes our anxiety shows up with images, like the ones I just showed. Sometimes trigger words. We could just be walking down the street and see a newspaper that has the word bomb, or some other visual that brings up, triggers this same anxiety bubble forth. And in our daily life, there's so many different triggers that can bring on this kind of intense feelings of anxiety. So why now is it happening? So yes, there is an increase in the number of terrorist attacks around the world, in our country and around the world. But the increase in terrorism attacks is pretty small, and I'll show you the numbers over the past couple of years. Yes, a slight increase in these atrocities. But more than anything, my hypothesis is that we're so flooded with the different images and the different reminders of all the dangers that would fall under that umbrella of terrorism anxiety through 24 access to news coverage. And I'm a CNN junkie, and so the second that I get home, if I have any free time, I always have the news in the background, and I want to stay informed, but also what that does is it keeps my mind constantly on high alert, reminded of all the dangers that are out there. And then living in this age of social media where we log on to maybe take a break while we're waiting online and see what our friends are up to, and then we get different commentaries and updates on all the different dangers and scary occurrences that really are happening right now. But when we're constantly having access to them, it feels like it's happening a lot more frequently, and it feels like it's happening to us all the time. And so there's a lot of trauma. We are constantly getting re-traumatized by different images that hundreds of years ago when things happened, they happened and they were terrible, but we weren't constantly living it out all the time. So, I believe a lot of the anxiety that we're all experiencing comes from this nonstop access to information that we're all flooded with. So I'm just checking in to see if we have any questions yet or any thoughts. And right now, no one's out there, but, well, you're all out there, but nobody's commenting. So feel free to share your thoughts, share what your own experiences have been. Neil, you're still out there?
Yeah, so you talk about how our exposure to all the coverage just kind of adds to the fear. And I think that's really true. What is your suggestion? Should we limit our exposure? Or it's kind of hard to do because we're kind of in the habit of wanting to hear what's the latest.
Right, and that's a really good question, and one I kind of have to ask myself, given that I do, it's my default to want to really know what's going on, and it's about setting some limits and having some self-control and just self-care about, yes, I might want to have a nonstop news marathon. I'm kind of compelled to do it, but at the same time, turning off the TV and maybe doing a meditation or going for a walk around the neighborhood or going and doing something calming and soothing and accessing a different part of my brain. And so, yeah, it's really about having those limits in place. And
so we have a comment that came in. I think this is from a therapist. It says, I advise my clients to watch 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening, and that's it, like as a maximum. And this is what, and then the therapist says, and this is the same access my parents had to news. That was, a number of years ago before all the technology and internet. That was all that was available.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot to me, though. 2 hours of watching violent, scary images.
Okay. And it looks like we have one other comment. Can you? Oh, it got cut off. I don't see the whole thing. Okay, I'm going to move on, and then we'll get to the next comment after. So, yeah, part of it is it is the case we can't be in denial that there aren't certain atrocities and dangers that are occurring in our current life. But in terms of the frequency of how often all of these things are happening, it feels a whole lot more given our access to the information nonstop. So talking a little bit about that, and this slide was borrowed from Statista, that if we look at the terrorist attacks worldwide and the fatalities due to terrorist attacks in the last 10 years, really it's gone up from 20,000 to 30,000, but not nearly as dramatically as our fears around these kind of attacks and how often we're thinking about it and it's impacting our day-to-day life. So kind of along the same lines, the likelihood of, this was from 2013, so looking at the numbers from the slide before, maybe it's a teeny bit more, but our actual chances of dying by a terrorist attack would be 1 in 20 million. And then if we compare that to other, this is always a fun topic, like all the ways that we can die and the likelihood, but just looking at the facts, that there'd be 1 out of 112 chance of dying in a motor vehicle accident.
I have a thought.
Yeah.
So if it's only a 1 in 20 million chance that terrorism is going to affect me, okay, so maybe 1 in 500,000 that it's going to affect somebody that I know, then the news is hitting me with that nonstop, and things that actually might affect me a lot more often, like car crashes, don't hear much about that on the news, or other risks that have a lot more, possible impact on my life. So am I being misled by what I'm hearing on the news?
Right, and certainly not to be all conspiracy theory or the media, but it still is a business, and what sells are graphic images. A news clip about seatbelt buckling and
wouldn't get ratings.
Distracted driving, being tired and driving, isn't quite as attention-grabbing and doesn't draw the same viewers. So in no way am I saying that terrorism is not happening. It's not true. Anxiety isn't about fearing something that is not any form of anxiety. Fear of flying, fear of dogs. Anxiety is based on a real fear, something that could truly happen. I always tell my clients, like, okay, you're not, when somebody says, oh, I'm having this irrational fear, I'm like, that's not really irrational. You're not coming in here telling me you're fearing, looking out the window of my office, that this tree is going to come to life and grab you and squeeze you to death. You're fearing something, a plane could crash, that your loved one could die. These are all things that could happen. But how likely is it that it's going to happen? So
because it's
anxiety
bad,
is a way of, it enhances the likelihood.
Because something is bad, does that make it likely to happen? I know it would be really bad, but is that the same thing? Is it likely?
Right, but we become sort of on high alert for potential dangers because our brain obviously would like us to survive, but so it's really scanning for the things that could be really, really big and really, really bad, and so it makes us very hyper alert to those potential things versus hyper alert to other dangers that don't necessarily seem as catastrophic, although they certainly, based on the facts, are.
We have an interesting comment.
Please.
I'm a CNN junkie also. I try to impose self-imposed limits on my news watching. But occasionally I feel guilty when I turn away from the tragedies of the world to do something positive for myself. Do you ever see this phenomenon?
It's a wonderful, insightful comment. And I think I'm going to get to it a little later on, but in terms of the treatment, quote-unquote treatment for terrorism anxiety, which isn't truly a DSM currently, who knows in the future, a current category of anxiety, terrorism anxiety, I'd probably put it under specific phobia if someone came in and they're specifically struggling with worrying about active terrorism. But anyway, and part of the treatment is number one, creating a life that matters. So engaging in life versus sitting watching the news, not as a distraction, but because that's what life is really about, and making all your moments count. So it doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to go just pretend that there aren't certain atrocities happening and go distract myself with an inane existence. I'm going to maybe go volunteer to facilitate a community dialogue to help separate groups find ways to connect. Or I'm going to go walk my dog and just create another moment of joy that hopefully trickles out to the universe. Like, I'm going to live a life that matters and that I'm hopefully proud of most of the times, and create change. So I would say it's not turning away from the news to run from it, but turning towards your life to fully live it as fully as possible, because sometimes awful things might happen, and in those moments in between, actually trying to live fully.
I have a question for our audience. In response to all the anxiety and news about terrorism, do you not do things like, oh, I'm not going to go to that event or a shopping mall or a club because a terrorist incident happened at a place like that? Are we limiting our lives in any way, really basically giving the terrorists what they're trying to accomplish and changing our lifestyles and changing this, creating lives that really are meaningful? Do people have any experiences of avoiding or not doing activities because of the fear of terrorism?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I certainly see in my practice that I hear people with different examples of missed 4th of July parades, or it could be I keep kind of grouping other kinds of anxiety, but whether it's a fear of flying, but part of the fear of flying is fearing that somebody might, there might be an explosive on the bomb and missing their child's wedding across the country, something that super matters to them. Someone had a comment, but I think it disappeared.
I'm sorry, I erased it inadvertently. She could type it again, but I think it was about a friend who's preventing her child from doing a lot of activities for fear that she could be harmed in a terrorist attack.
Right.
Like wanting to keep our children safe, and we hear these terrible things on the news, and so we want to limit our kids' activities. Is that a good idea?
Right. Right. And so there's deciding what risks in life we're willing to take and what are important to us. Like, am I going to, because I really want to get to the bagel store, am I going to run across the street and jump in front of a truck? No, that's probably not a good risk to take, even though I really am hungry and want a bagel. But is it a risk to take to go to a parade to show my kids what the 4th of July is about and see fireworks? For me, that is, I want them to experience different aspects of life. So that's a risk I am willing to take.
We have a great comment. I try to keep in mind that the terrorists want us to stop living our lives, which is a really good reason not to do it, to keep living our lives. Oh, here's an interesting comment. Don't the statistics show that children are actually safer these days than they were when we were children? We don't feel that they're safer, but are they actually in more danger than decades ago? Right.
Yeah, and that's similar to fact versus fiction, that we actually still are living longer. Our children have less of a chance of mortality, yet it feels so much less safe. And that's really what we're talking about is how to kind of manage those feelings of fear. I'm certainly not here saying everything is perfectly safe, and that would be nice, but that's just not life. But the difference between our feelings of danger versus the reality. So I'm going to move on, and then maybe just because people might be getting bored with seeing the same slide, and then we'll kind of go back to a next round of questions and comments. But I really appreciate the participation selfishly. It makes it a lot more fun for me, so that's good. I like to not feel like I'm talking to myself, so thank you all for that. So once again, kind of that fear versus reality, showing that in terms of the actual numbers of deaths due to terrorism over the last 10 years, a very slight increase, and the likelihood very, very, very small. But in terms of when people were surveyed of how worried are you of becoming a terrorist victim in 2015, in terms of the percent that were very or somewhat or very worried, 49% of people stated that this is something that they're either somewhat or very worried about. And then I think, and I don't have this data in front of me, but if we ask people, how worried are you that you're going to die in a car accident today, I don't think 50% of people would say I'm somewhat or very worried, yet the likelihood is, unfortunately, a lot more likely. But it just doesn't have the same catchiness and impact that we're seeing day in and day out.
And we have a comment along those same lines that the events of the past several days where we see people harmed on live video increase our sense of fear because we're seeing it, even though the actual risk hasn't increased. Dr. Kissen, how is it that we get so confused? Like, we see it, and it seems so much more likely than it really is, but it's actually 1 in 20 million. I have trouble with that.
Well,
how can we get more realistic about our thinking about these things?
Yeah, I mean, our mirror neurons allow us to have empathy. It allows us, when someone else is in pain, we feel pain. When our child is hungry, we feel that, and it hurts us, and we want to feed them. And it keeps us connected as people and keeps us from being sociopaths. It keeps us thinking beyond ourselves because it hurts our brain when other people are experiencing pain. And so it's adaptive, but
so terrorists are actually playing on our empathy.
Yes. Yes.
Very interesting. Oh, we have a question. If we could go back to the last slide. She notices that there was a drop in worry after 2001. And she asks, what do you think accounts for that big drop in the worry that we had after the 9/11?
That's interesting. I actually can't possibly imagine. I would have, now that you pointed that out, thought it would actually be an increase. So I don't know.
Well, I guess maybe it spiked. It really spiked. I guess maybe we were seeing all the media.
Oh, yeah. So maybe it's sort of. But
and we have a comment. Sorry.
Yeah.
We have a comment that if you look at the chart, it didn't go back to where it was before. It stayed higher.
Right.
After 9/11, it did stay higher.
Yeah, and maybe, some of the politics and feeling that we've got this and we're going in and we're going to, this isn't a political conversation, but it's hard to know what accounts for different shifts that are happening. So we just have a comment about somebody stating that they avoid certain things due to fear of flying, particularly fear of flying because of terrorism, and that they grew up with a constant threat of terrorism around them, so it's somewhat accepted as part of life. And it's so unfortunate that in some ways it's come to be accepted as the norm. Yeah, I mean, in some ways it feels like the age of terrorism, where acts of violence are used and disseminated and spread out to create mass fear versus that act in and of itself. War is war, but when acts are done with the very purpose of creating terror. So it's we are wired to react to it. It's complicated stuff, but I don't believe it's hopeless. So that's the good news. There are ways we can work with our brains and our lives to have less anxiety in our daily life. So just some examples of terrorism anxiety that I'm just seeing in my practice just in the last couple of weeks. Names change. Sarah's a 35-year-old mother. She was home after dropping her daughter off at school, and she heard a bunch of ambulances go by and immediately dropped what she was working on and felt full-on panic and sort of ran into the streets to see what direction the ambulances were going in and fearing that they were heading towards her daughter's school. And, we live in the city of Chicago. There are many, many hospitals. There are many ambulances. There are many reasons why ambulances will go by. But, with all the different information that we see about the world we live in, for the mind to think, that ambulance is going right to my daughter's school because it is heading east. That's where it must be heading, is a leap that the mind can very quickly make, even if there's 1 million other places in the city just as likely that the ambulance would be going in. Bob was at a movie theater with his wife and noticed someone he defined as suspicious walking in. He said the person had a sweatshirt with a hood on and kind of had a sneaky-looking face, and looked kind of strange, like they were up to something, and feared that this might be someone who was going to engage in some kind of attack of some sort, and left the movie theater. Another example, a patient, when she's about to get on an airplane, she scans all the different customers that are about to get on board or getting on board the plane and does her own safety check of who might look dangerous, who doesn't look dangerous, and if her brain decides someone might be a terrorist, she might not get on that flight and might try to get on another flight. She has taken many, many, many trains to different cities around the country after her anxiety has made her paralyzed with fear and chose to not get on the flight. So different examples of how it kind of bleeds into everyday life. Okay, we have a question. Questions came up. What role does terrorism anxiety have in our mistaken generalizations that we must fear all Muslims or all people with mental illness? So anxiety, by definition, is it's the part of the brain that's on high alert for danger. So anything that looks, whether that's thinking that a branch on the floor is a snake, or a cloud passing by could be a lightning storm, it's looking at something that is probably benign, looking at a mole and thinking it's cancerous. So mistaking something that we are unclear, it's uncertain. Is this person maybe dangerous, maybe not? Are there signs that they could be dangerous, which anyone could be dangerous? So by definition, that is uncertain. There's no guarantees that anybody is not going to prove to be dangerous. So we try to use different tricks to decipher, to try to obtain certainty. And that's the one thing, we could get a little closer, but life is, we could try to make some decent decisions, but life is uncertain to a certain extent. So yeah, we sometimes generalize to try to get to a place to soothe ourselves, to pretend that we're in control and can protect ourselves by deciding that all people who are X are dangerous or Y are dangerous, which of course is not the case. Yeah. Neil, was that you? Uh-oh. Neil, did I lose you? Is that everyone still
there? Okay, I think we're back now.
Oh, good. I was feeling presentation anxiety, not nearly as bad as terrorism anxiety, but it's still
a little technical.
Yeah.
Glitch. All right.
Adrenaline rush.
I think our audio is back now. Thanks.
Good. All right.
Could you maybe go back a little bit in what you were saying?
Yeah. You're saying I should go back because you lost me?
Yeah, so this point about, okay, so the terrorist was a Muslim. Does that mean I should fear everybody that's also a Muslim? Well, what if the terrorist had brown eyes? Does that mean I should be fearing everybody that has brown eyes? Am I making some mistake in my thinking when I make that kind of generalization in my fear?
Sure. I mean, it's all or nothing thinking that somebody who has HIV has a tattoo, so I'm going to avoid everyone who has, I'm thinking of some of my OCD clients, I'm going to avoid anyone who has a tattoo because maybe they somehow got contact with a needle. We could think of more absurd examples, but it's the same kind of reasoning. I want to try to protect myself from danger, so I'm going to just generalize a whole category. And it, in reality, it doesn't actually protect us from danger. And all the worse, it kind of bumps up the anxiety that we're feeling. So the moments that we do have are more fueled. All these attempts at control actually leave us feeling even more out of control and more in danger. And then, the moments of our life are more uncomfortable and less productive. So nobody really wins with that kind of strategy.
How do we correct that kind of thinking if I find myself doing it? I saw that the terrorist was a Muslim, and now I'm afraid of every Muslim.
Right. Well, good thing that you asked. Kind of, the next slide that I have here is some tools to reduce terrorism anxiety. So the first slide I have here is cognitive therapy, but kind of the dirty of it would be kind of comparing fear thoughts with with more fact-based thoughts. It doesn't mean comparing fear thoughts like, oh no, what if I die, with happy thoughts, like I'm never going to die, or that's not going to happen. At some point I'm going to die. But more realistic, fact-based thoughts versus fear-based thoughts. So what I said here is when you're having an anxious moment, notice I'm anxious. Often what happens is we're so anxious that we're knee-deep in it, and we don't really have the perspective to even notice it's happening. So if nothing else, no other takeaway from this talk, when you're anxious, trying to like, oh, I'm having that uncomfortable feeling. Notice and identify, like, okay, this is me feeling anxious. You might not even know what you're anxious about, but at least notice that you're anxious. Then step 2, try to catch a thought that's showing up for you. And it might not be obvious right away, but if you kind of slow down and just open up to the moment, notice and write down the thought, like, oh, someone just got on the train and they look a little shady or they look dangerous. And then pretend you were, a lawyer arguing a counterpoint. What would you respond back to that thought? Neil, can you think of like a more realistic, like, oh, that person looks dangerous?
Right, and they might have just had a bad day. And could there be other explanations for how that person looks?
Right, like are there many other,
yeah.
Good. What else might you be able to try to, and you don't even have to believe it, just practice kind of offering a different perspective on that moment. So what else might you say?
Yeah, so like say the example I like the example about Muslims because I could ask myself, is every terrorist a Muslim? And there are many examples of terrorists that are not Muslims. So does that mean I should fear everybody in the world? Does that make any sense? And another thought, another rational response I could think of would be, is it really possible for me to detect who is the terrorist in the world?
Right, like I had this internal scanning, although, sometimes we feel like we do know. But then I ask people, like, okay, so how many times has this alarm gone off for you? Like, oh, no, this is dangerous over the course of your life. And they maybe say, well, I've been alive this many days, and it's probably happened, like, most days of my life. And how many of these actual tragedies, how many catastrophic moments have you been in? Like, oh, none? Okay. So how many false alarms? What does your own data tell you? The number of times your brain has given you the signal, this is dangerous, and yet how many times it actually ends up working out? So how accurate is your internal detection of danger? Is it possibly a little trigger happy?
And when it comes to terrorism, I'm remembering your slide about that it's 1 in 20 million. So what are the realistic chances that I'm really going to be involved in a terrorist attack, be a victim of a terrorist attack?
Right. Like
1
I'm
in
on
20
a
million
right now.
Doesn't sound like I have a very good chance of actually experiencing it.
Right. Right. Like kind of staying with it, and it takes effort to do it. It kind of hurts the brain sometimes. So the brain wants to think a certain way. So to offer counter thoughts kind of goes against what your brain wants to do in that moment. And it's like an exercise. Like going to the gym and lifting weights even though you don't want to lift weights. Every time you provide your brain with a new way of looking at something, you're creating a new neural network. So I have here this image of going from like the emotional brain to a more rational brain. So
I just had another thought.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
So I'm out in the world and maybe seeing Muslims wearing a turban, or people just look kind of seedy and unfriendly occasionally. And then and so I'm afraid of terrorism, and my rational response might go something like, well, the actual chance of me being a victim of terrorism in my whole life is 1 in 20 million. And the chances of me hearing news about terrorist events is probably 100%. And the chances of me getting anxious about terrorism and worried about it is probably pretty good too. But is that the same thing as my actual risk of being attacked by a terrorist?
Right, right. And I often, ask people to sort of really kind of take a moment and when they're feeling anxious and just really think, okay, where is the danger right now? If I'm having this moment that's saying, oh no, I'm in danger, really look around your room. Put your arms out in front of you. Like, is there a bear lunging at you? Are your pants on fire? Are there snakes eating your toe? Like, where is the immediate danger? If you feel like you're in immediate danger, yet really check around and you're really safe and sound. So it is that false alarm. It doesn't mean at some point a bear might not eat you, and somewhere in the world a bear might be eating someone, but you're feeling as though it's happening in that moment when it's not. So these are different ways to kind of help shake up the mind a little bit and get it to kind of be here and now versus then and there. And I'll talk a little bit about mindfulness also.
Can I just make one more comment before you go on? So I guess what I'm getting from what Dr. Kissen is saying is that when we're feeling this kind of anxiety about terrorism or about dangers in general, that the CBT approach is to allow that anxiety, maybe even identify that scary thought, but then not just sit and be the victim of that experience, to actually see if you can come up with a rational response that puts it in some perspective.
Right, right.
Here's an interesting comment. How do you dovetail talking yourself out of being afraid with mindfulness? That we should just acknowledge what we're experiencing. How do I should I be, when I feel fear, should I then just jump in and just try to talk myself out of that fear?
I'm just reading it. How do you dovetail talking yourself out of frustration with our instructions? You see, that's interesting. Did two different people say the same thing? Could we see something?
Yeah, I was kind of paraphrasing it a little bit.
Okay, but like the person before said something about
if I'm talking myself out of a fear, maybe there really is something that I should be afraid of there.
Could we be discounting important data? And so that's sort of the fear of giving up fear. Like when I talk to clients about how strong, how overactive the fear mechanism in their brain is, and they're like, I just want to feel more comfortable. I'm like, okay, well, would you want to turn it all the way off? Do you want it just to be down to a 0 so you're comfy, cozy, and not fearful at all? And it's like, well, no. Okay, well, why not? What's the purpose of fear? Well, if I wasn't afraid somewhat, then I would walk right in front of a car. I would go into a dark alley. Fear helps us survive. So we don't want to, I'm going to ignore all signs of danger. Like, yes, that person has a very large knife, but I'm going to walk right up to them. Well, I guess it depends on the situation. But we can all think of examples when it's very important to use our fear and to notice what data that we're getting. So it's just about turning it down. So imagine a volume switch that sees every tree branch as a snake versus seeing some things that look a little bit more like a snake, So we want some of it. We just want a little, or maybe sometimes a lot less of that overactive alarm system.
Okay, now I understand the comment, because another of our audience happened with a similar comment. So she says that in New York City, there are reminders, I guess billboards and reminders that say, see something, say something, posters and announcements. You see something that looks like it might be dangerous, then say something, I don't know, to authorities. I don't know what the case is there.
Or when our news puts us on code red alert, like just be really aware and be really afraid. And I don't know exactly why. Sure, if you're at an airport and someone has a backpack and they walk away and they haven't been near their backpack for, whatever, there are certain things that we should be alert to. There are certain things that, but it's it's not all or nothing, but what are the things that we really make sense to be aware of, and then where do we draw the line and just kind of move forward and living our life. And it's tricky. I'm not in any way saying it's easy, and I think, you know, for each person, it's defining a little bit what that means to them, like see something, say something. And maybe somebody, if they saw a parent that was being a little aggressive with their child, might say something, and that's okay. And someone else, what does that mean to you? When are you going to allow to kind of hone into that danger signal?
I don't think that message, see something, say something, is not very helpful because it's not specific enough. If there were guidelines for the public about, hey, everybody,
like,
here's some things that you should be aware of, and if you notice them, then tell the authorities, then fine.
Right. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide, and then maybe we'll do a couple more comments, too. So thank you, guys, for all of your comments and discussion. Another CBT tool or a methodology, exposure and response prevention. So interestingly, this is, I guess, the opposite of what I was saying before about not taking in too much news. But then I have some clients who are so afraid of the dangers of modern life and terrorism and mass shooting, all those terrible, scary words on that slide that I just showed, that the second they see a news article pop up on the newsfeed, they close it. And the second they hear a word, they try to not think about it. And unfortunately, there's the concept of thought suppression, that the more we try to not think about something, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant, don't think about a pink elephant. The only way to not think about...
Dr. Kissen, now I'm thinking about pink elephants everywhere.
So it's not that different. Like, don't think about terrorism, don't think about terrorism, don't think about terrorism, don't think about death, don't think about death, don't think... And then, unfortunately, I have clients that all day long are thinking about death and terrorism. They're so desperate, they so badly want to not think about it, that it's with them every moment of their waking day as they're fighting to not think about it. So sometimes, you know, it's helpful. It's hard, but helpful to do exposures of writing terrorism. We'll write it down, we'll say it, sometimes we'll read articles. We'll do exposures enough that the brain habituates to those words, and instead of, it doesn't mean terrorism isn't scary, and it doesn't mean it's not tragic. It just means the brain isn't all day long trying to not think about it, and therefore all day long it's thinking about it. So we do this a lot with OCD. This is the main treatment approach, exposure response prevention. And it's very effective really for all kinds of anxieties, exposing yourself to that which you fear, and response prevention means not engaging in certain safety behaviors or compulsions that serve to bring down anxiety a little bit, but overall just keep the anxiety cycle spinning and spinning out of control. So I could kind of talk a little bit about how that would play out with terrorism and anxiety, but really the most I've seen it lately is more just avoidance, excess avoidance, which then increases anxiety more than it assists it.
So we talked earlier about people avoiding living their life because of fear of terrorism. And then now you're talking about some people might be affected by trying to stop any exposure to the news or try to stop any thoughts that they're having about terrorism.
Right, engaging in thought stopping. Right, like I want to not think about it, I want to not think about it. This is awful, it feels so awful to think about it. But then it just backfires. It'd be nice if it's like, okay, I don't want to think about that, so I'm going to not think about it. And we can do that by engaging in life, but sometimes when we fight so hard against the thought, we could increase its frequency and intensity.
I have a question. If I'm, okay, I'm hearing your information, and okay, so it isn't as likely as I thought it was, like it's really extremely unlikely that I'm going to be a victim of terrorism or somebody I love or care about is going to be a victim. But is it okay for me to still feel afraid of terrorism? Is it okay for me to still feel sad about the people that it's affected?
Well, I mean, I think if we didn't feel somewhat afraid and didn't feel sad, we would be numb and not human. I think that's part of the human.
So we have a comment. We have a question we have a question that's like along the same lines.
Right.
From one of our audience. How do you balance between helping clients manage their terrorism anxiety and also validating and normalizing feelings of sadness at hearing about these upsetting events?
Right. I kind of see it similar to like the grieving process versus PTSD. So when it's so important to grieve and it's so important to allow yourself to feel everything you're feeling and open up to the sadness and the pain and the suffering and just let it be there and move through you. And by trying to not feel that is how we actually can create more of a likelihood for PTSD or other things by not having all of that emotional pain. But for my clients, when it's impacting their daily functioning, when they're not able to get their kids to school because they're so afraid that there's going to be a mass shooting, or they're not able to go to work because they're up all night worrying about a terrorist attack, when functioning is impaired, when such extreme distress is happening more often than not, when this has been going on for a while, that's when I kind of move into more of a anxiety management model versus a grieving model. When it continues to happen for a very long time, it's really impacting somebody's functioning. Because if someone can't meet the requirements of their life and aren't able to get any joy or peace out of their life, then it's something that would kind of have to take a more, I think, a bigger, do a little bit more aggressive work with than just sort of honoring the pain, because your kids still have to life still has to happen.
So what I'm hearing you say is that it's okay for me to feel my anxieties about terrorism and my sadness for the victims, and it's really important for me to go out and do my activities and live my life and express what matters in my life.
Right. Yeah, I think it's definitely not live your life and distract. Did I just use how I just thought? Okay. Yeah, it's very important to, it's not one or the other. Like, I'm going to live my life and not think about how hard life is and all the current challenges of life. Or I'm going to only sit and think about just what a disastrous existence we humans currently have in 2016 and not really do anything about it and be paralyzed with fear, then what good are we anyway? So it kind of leads into the next slide I have of engaging in values-based living. So really defining what is important to you, what you want your life to be about, where you want to put your life force and your energy, and what makes it worth it. Because, yeah, I could leave the house today and get hit by a car. That's a risk. I could stay home, but it's worth it to me because I want my kids to get to camp, have a good day. I want to have moments with my clients. It's worth it to me. Plus, if I stayed home, maybe my house could catch on fire. I mean, anything could happen anywhere. I don't need to be like, blasé about it, but sometimes kind of a little humor can help to keep things in perspective, to give us the little jump start we need to live a life that matters. And that's for each person to define what that means.
I love these questions, Dr. Kissen. What's values-based living? What's important to me? What do I want my life to be about? Where do I want to put my energy? How does that compare to where my energy is going now? And what are the activities that I value? And are there risks involved in anything we do? And is that okay?
Right. Yeah, because it's got to matter enough It's got to matter enough to deal with how annoying life is. It's got to matter enough to deal with how dangerous life could be. It's got to matter. Otherwise, there's, the benefits more than outweigh the risk.
Well, we got a nice comment from a therapist. I suggest to clients that they look for how they can take some control over their environment, and that being proactive is empowering. Thanks for that comment.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a lot of clients maybe with OCD struggling with fear of, oh no, did I unplug my curling iron, and oh no, did I leave the stove on? Let me check it again, let me check it again, let me check it again. And then when I talk about basic safety, like, okay, well, when was the last time you put new batteries in your fire alarms and your smoke alarms? Oh, I haven't done that in a couple of years. So there really are, that's the good news. Like, there are things we can control. There happen to be some things we can't. But it's kind of, our minds don't find it quite as glamorous to think, or interesting to think about that smoke detector battery versus, oh no, what if I was responsible for a fire that because I left in my hair straightener. So figuring out what we can control and then doing those things.
It looks like oh gee, that hour has sure gone by. We just have a couple of minutes. Dr. Kissen, do you have any closing thoughts or maybe a couple more points you want to share?
And I don't need to get all into it, but I'm a huge fan of mindfulness training, and it sounds so, I don't know, I feel like it sounds a little overused of late and maybe even a little complicated, but there's so many great apps out there and tools out there, and what it's about is really just teaching your brain to pay attention to the current moment. And when different thoughts or feelings show up, practicing returning your attention back to an anchor. And by doing that, we learn to honor and notice all the different scary thoughts that show up. Like, I hear you, okay, you're there, and now I'm returning back to this book that I want to read. So I think it's one of the best tools to help put your energy towards the current moment, towards valued living. And I have a little website I made called Think Mindfully. It's free. You could check that out. I really like Headspace, 10 minutes a day they give you. So there's so much out there, but my only point about mindfulness is it doesn't have to be a whole complicated endeavor. You could just do it for 1 minute a day and kind of build up that mental muscle to be in the moment and not with your intrusive, scary thoughts.
So can I suggest people can write down the website thinkmindfully.com to get a little guidance on how to do some mindfulness. It doesn't have to be very complicated. Yeah.
And I think on the ADA website, we also have some recommendations for mindfulness apps. And the last thing that I have is how to reduce terrorism anxieties to get help. That sometimes just having someone on the sidelines is really helpful to just get that perspective, and there's nothing weak. If anything, it's super brave and super powerful, and there are lots of people out there that could help get each of us unstuck when we need a helping hand. So try to not be too hard on yourself. It doesn't, all it means is you're willing to take a step forward. So don't beat yourself up. It would be helpful to get a little assistance. You go to the ADA website and find lots of great people.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kissen. It was really helpful. We're getting a number of thank yous coming in. Thanks, everybody, for attending and participating. And this is one of a series of webinars for the public. Please let friends and family know about our series. And finally, consider making a contribution to ADAA on the website so we continue these kinds of programs. So bye for now, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
All right. Thank you guys all so much.